How do you have a winning podcast marketing strategy where, yes, it's nice to go out there and start your own podcast, but at the same time, it's nice to go out there and grow your listenership? So, what I recommend is the first strategy is making sure that you're creating social media content from your podcast interview. You can think about it, you're having a 30-minute interview per se. You can really take 5 to 7 clips from that podcast interview and put them out there on your social media so that people can find your podcast that way. There's a tool that you could use called Capwing. And what's cool about Capwing is you can take your podcast interview, you can put it into the platform, and it'll split out and create 8 to 10 different social media posts for you. It takes about an hour for the platform to work. And then you can go through, you can edit it, you can, you know, change it up however you please. But it's so simple to use and it's very beneficial because now I can go out there on my social media and I can share these posts from my interview. And then I can also have the guests go out there and share the clips on their social media as well. And that's sort of a two-pronged strategy where you have all this footage from doing this podcast interview. You want to go make sure that you're going out there and you're promoting it. So you're going to have that guest promote it on there, and then you're going to promote it on your end. It's very helpful for me as a guest myself. Is when someone gives me footage, I can go out there and I can automatically share on my social media. Yes, I could go through and I could splice it up and edit it using that tool Capwing that I had mentioned. But a lot of times I'll just get an email from host saying, "Hey, your podcast interview has gone live," and that's that. I'm like, well, there's no assets. I'll throw it up on our website. I'll maybe put it on our email, but it's going to be a little bit harder for me to promote it, not knowing exactly what I want to be promoting. So other than sharing, "Hey, I was on this podcast and went live. Here you go." Where I find if I took a minute clip from that interview and put it out there and be like, "Hey, you want to check out the full interview? Here you go." So you really want to utilize your podcast guest in that scenario by utilizing their social media, but you have to do the back end legwork on your end of creating that social media content for them and making sure that it looks professional. Outside of that, you want to make sure that you're sending out your podcast once the episode goes live to your email list. I find a lot of people that don't do this. You want to make sure that you're incorporating that. What I like to do is create a template that the podcast host can also send off to their email list. So that way they don't even have to like write the copy or anything. I make it very easy and reputable, or repeatable, I should say, not reputable. Hopefully it's reputable, but repeatable for our podcast guests, where I know, like, okay, your interview went live today. Here are your social media assets. Here's an email newsletter you can send out to your audience. Again, not everyone's going to be doing it, but for I wouldn't say the few, but for the majority that do that, I just want to make their lives as easy as possible for them to share their podcast interviews. So just to recap real quick, you want to make sure you have that social media content created. You want to share that content with the guests so that they promote it, and then also to your audience. You want to make sure you have an email sent out to your list, and you want to make sure that that podcast you have an email ready to go out that the person can send out to their email list, and just make it as easy as possible in that scenario. You want to make sure, or I guess going forward, not to go too further out, but there's an SEO aspect of it. I like to title all of our podcast episodes based on some sort of SEO keyword that I'm going to be targeting. I find that this is going to drive organic traffic to our site, and I can see which people are coming. I can see how many people are not which people, but how many people are coming to our site based on these SEO driven title keywords. So whenever I have a title, even for this helpful content, I'll go through and I'll use a tool called SpyFu, or I'll use another one called Answer. It's either Answer or Ask the Public. I'll go through, I'll see what people are searching, and then that's how I get ideas for the content of the podcast. When I have a guest on, say they're talking about affordable housing, I'll type in affordable housing on SpyFu. It'll give me all the questions and topics that people have. One might be how to invest in affordable housing. So I'll title the podcast How to Invest in Affordable Housing in 2024 and just make it as simple as that. Maybe I'll throw in ChatGPT, give me some different alternatives. But I want to make sure that it's SEO driven. So that way I can take the blog post that I'm going to be putting out there on our website for the show notes page, and there's a potential for just organic traffic to come directly to that blog post page. So I want to make sure that it is SEO driven. Now, if you want to put a little bit more behind it, you could go through and you could run Facebook ads to your podcast. You could run Google ads. You could even buy spots on other podcasts promoting your podcast. I've never really paid for any of that. I found that doing the social media content, doing the email list, and the SEO aspect of it, that's really what helps. And then I would say, on top of that, sort of the marketing strategy is leveraging some of the bigger guest names that you can get on your show. And I put together an episode on how to land celebrity guests for your podcast. And by having these bigger names, it's just going to allow your podcast to seem more reputable, maybe bigger than it really is, which is a good thing, especially when you're just starting off. So I find having a good quality, reputable names on your show, and this isn't to say like every single podcast episode you do, you have to have a celebrity on your show, or I wouldn't say influencer, or just say someone within your space. So someone in the real estate space for me might be someone that has a billion, 5 billion assets under management. Maybe they're a podcast host that a lot of people know. That's going to be the type of person that I want to get on my show. Again, maybe I don't want them on, not that I wouldn't want them on, but occasionally I sprinkle them in. It's just like, oh, okay, this guy's being a guest on this podcast. That podcast host must know what they're talking about. So I like to leverage the brand and reputation that they've built for my own show as well. But that's really how to create the winning marketing strategy. I mean, it doesn't have to be overcomplicated. I know when I was going through and planning it, it sounds relatively simple. The SEO aspect of it, the aspect of the social media posts, and then the aspect of making sure that you have the email content ready to send out. And it probably took me about a month of going through and putting together like, okay, how often do I want to share these podcast posts? Where am I going to put them for the guest that's on my show? For the email that I'm going to be sending out to my list, what is that going to look like? Who's going to be doing on our team? And it took me about a month, maybe 2 months, to build out just all these systems and processes for it. So that once I launched my show, I already had these marketing strategies set in place. I had the systems and processes set in place. So I could continue to grow my show almost organically. And over time, my podcast is just going to continue to grow from day one all the way to the first year, into the second year, into the third year, however long the podcast keeps going. But I hope that was helpful for you on the winning podcast marketing strategies.